So welcome to this early or ESAS session on Shine Like a Rockstar. My name is Manoj Lalu. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa in Canada and associate scientist at the Research Institute there as well too. So I guess I'm an early anesthesia scholar myself. And I'm one of the moderators along with Boris here, so I'll let Boris introduce himself and he'll let you know how the session is going to be run for today as well.
All right, thank you all for coming and for staying. I'm Boris Heifetz. I'm a clinical assistant professor at Stanford. And I actually, in light of Max's talk, I just want to point out that Max is the person I credit with going into anesthesia. I was an undergraduate when he was finishing his PhD, and he was the only person I knew who went from basic science into anesthesia. And so I called him a few years after that, and he tried to talk me out of it, but eventually here I am, for better or worse. Anyway, so so we have, again, going on with the theme of hearing about all kinds of different pathways to success. We have three outstandingly successful faculty up here who I'll introduce. And again, the theme of this talk is Shine Like a Rockstar, different paths to success. And we tasked our speakers to come up with a couple answers to several questions. So first, what was their biggest challenge, and how did they adapt or overcome that in the course of their career? Number two is, how much influence did funding agencies and the departmental or institutional need direct their career path? So these are some of the pressures that are going to exert their influence over your career. And then finally, what's the one piece of advice that they would give early career anesthesia scientists? So I'll introduce all three of our speakers, and then we'll bring them up. So Dr. Paloma Toledo is an obstetric anesthesiologist and assistant professor at the Center for Healthcare Studies at Northwestern. And her research focuses on understanding and reducing racial and ethnic disparities in peripartum care and improving the quality and safety for women delivering in the United States. She completed her clinical training at Northwestern University, and after an obstetric anesthesia fellowship, she completed an AHRQ-funded T32 training grant and got her master's in public health at Northwestern. Since then, she's been funded by an AHRQ F32 award, and she received a Career Development Award from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and is currently funded by the AHRQ. She's the chair of the Foundation for Anesthesia Education and Research and an associate editor for ANA. So next we have Dr. Peter Nagele, who's very recently appointed to be professor and chair of the Department of Anesthesia and Critical Care at the University of Chicago, so he has a home field advantage. And prior to this appointment, he spent most of his academic career at WashU and St. Louis, where he had NIH funding with research program and postoperative cardiac events and looking at nitrous oxide and treatment-resistant major depression, which is something I'm personally interested in, and clinically served as the section chief of trauma anesthesia and has a strong interest in innovation and entrepreneurship, and it sounds like he has a spin-off company from his nitrous work called Nitro Biomedical. And finally, Dr. Laureen Hill on the far right. So she finished her anesthesia residency at Stanford and did a fellowship in critical care medicine, cardiac anesthesia, and pediatric anesthesia with a focus on congenital heart disease. So that's a lot of punishment, and I applaud that. She was on the faculty at Stanford as assistant professor until July 2000, and then she was recruited to WashU, where I believe she worked with Dr. Nagele. And she developed a new cardiothoracic intensive care unit service and a CT critical care training program. Then she went on to develop one of the largest anesthesia-based preoperative evaluation clinics in the country. And then it sounds like she took a little bit of a veer off into a different direction and then went on to get an MBA because all the fellowships, I guess, weren't enough training. And so that was at WashU in 2006. So she served as the vice chairman at the department at WashU for 7 years. And then she was recruited to be the chair at Emory School Anesthesia Department in 2011, and has now, I think, landed as a senior vice president and chief operating officer at New York Presbyterian Hospital Columbia, where she's responsible for daily operations, including cost, quality, and delivery of services. And I think they have a lot of fellowships that you can probably pursue there as well, if you get bored of that. So without further ado, Dr. Toledo.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak this morning. I'm really excited to come back to your group. It's always inspirational to see so many people who want to do an academic anesthesia career. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to be successful as a clinician educator. You know, usually when people hear, oh, I do education work, they're like, oh, that's a resident project, you're never going to get funded. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can be creative with your work in education and be still impactful but get an academic career going. So I have nothing to disclose, and today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how you get promoted as a clinician educator. I'm going to talk about how you frame educational projects in a way that you can actually accomplish research. I'm going to talk about funding educational research, and then I'm just going to give you my general career advice. But I'm Hispanic, I'm Cuban, you know, I can't do just one thing, so I'm going to give you a couple. So I think the most important thing if you want to do educational research is look at what your institution asks you to do if you want to get promoted as a clinician educator. So this is the Northwestern website for faculty promotion and tenure. So just go to your institution and see what does it take, because again, most of us are really great at following checklists, right? So you just look at what I need to do, check off the box, and see what needs to get accomplished to be promoted. So at Northwestern, you know, we have a couple of domains that you need to excel in if you want to be a clinician educator. So obviously teaching and education is the first, but you can be promoted as a clinician educator through research, through clinical impact and health services management. So starting with teaching excellence, just being a good educator in the operating room is not enough. It is the expectation that all faculty members teach residents and that you're good at teaching residents, right? Because who wants to be on faculty at an academic institution and just go to work, you know, sit quietly in the OR, start your case, bounce out, and then not do anything? So the expectation that you teach is always there. But the thing is, you really need to, if you want to be on this clinician educator path, excel as an educator. So you need to have evidence that your teaching evaluations of medical students, of residents, are really excellent. So the other way that you can do this in terms of, you know, checking off the boxes for your promotion is making sure you get teaching awards. Again, institutional teaching awards, national teaching awards. Make sure that you can document, I am a good educator. The other thing is you also need to have evidence that you have national and international recognition. So again, when you get these invitations for visiting professor invitations, or when you get asked to speak at a national meeting, take it, because again, this is documentation that you are a good educator, that people want you to come and talk to their groups. So you have to make sure that you do things that make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like I personally am very shy. I think, you know, there are a lot of things that I would rather do than speak in front of a whole room of people. But you have to push yourself and really do things that make you feel a little uncomfortable, because that's the way that you get recognized. The other thing that's really important is making sure that you document your teaching in ways. So every institution has started to develop teaching portfolios, and if your institution doesn't have a teaching portfolio established, look at some examples and see what does it take to be an educator in anesthesia, and what are the different things that you should be collecting and documenting so that you have a teaching portfolio and you can show evidence of your excellence in teaching. So for Northwestern, you have to show that you teach in courses. And again, it's not just the intraoperative teaching. You have to teach in the medical school, you can teach in the graduate school, you can teach at CME courses. So looking at these things. But another way that we can talk about being educators in anesthesia is through mentoring. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Foundation for Anesthesia and Education and Research, because I think that there are a lot of overlap opportunities here. But again, take all of those medical students that you work with, or residents that you work with, and then show that not just did you mentor them, but that the mentoring resulted in some kind of scholarly work. So did your mentoring result in publication? So here's one of my favorite examples. It's actually the first paper that I got published in anesthesiology. So I, for many years, have mentored students in the FAIR Medical Student Anesthesia Research Fellowship Program. And I've prided myself on trying to make sure that at least every student that comes to my quote-unquote lab gets a publication. And so what this student did as his side project was we looked at all of the students who were in the FAIR MSARF program, and we looked at how many of them published. And so here's my med student who now has a publication in anesthesiology. So again, make sure you take your educational projects and turn them into something that you can document, because it's always easier to count publications. I think that's the difference between people that are on the research track and people that are on the educator track. The researchers have publications, they have grants, it's easy to look at what your productivity has been. As educators, it's a little bit harder, but it still can be done. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you frame your research questions for educational projects, because it takes a little bit of creativity, but it definitely can be done. So this is the first example that I'm going to talk about. So again, I'm an obstetric anesthesiologist, and what do we talk about? Postpartum hemorrhage. When you think about maternal mortality, what kills mothers across the world? Hemorrhage, hypertensive disorders, blood clots. So postpartum hemorrhage is something that kills one mother at least every 7 minutes worldwide. So this is a huge problem. And again, I'm a little bit older, so when I trained, we didn't have quantified blood loss. We had to look at these various things and say how much blood there was on them. So you had to be a little bit good about saying, ooh, this looks like 2,500, that looks like a liter, this looks like that. So we didn't have any way of quantifying blood loss. And I personally thought this is pretty terrible because mothers are dying and we should be able to quantify blood loss better. So this is something that's ripe for an educational project, right? So what I did first was look at, okay, so we know that estimating blood loss is a problem. How can I do this? So I designed a study so that we could look at what the actual blood loss was. And so here on the y-axis, you have the difference between the estimated and the actual. On the x, you have the actual blood volumes in these simulated scenarios. And what you can see is anything above the blue line is they overestimated, anything underneath the blue line is they underestimated. And basically what I found was that small volumes of blood loss, people overestimated the blood loss. But then when you got to the big blood losses, the thing that actually kill moms, they were really underestimating the blood loss by about 40%. So again, you can teach people how to estimate blood loss better. So what I did was I broke out this question into a series of projects and then I published them in a variety of journals. But the first one was, can we train people to be better? The next question was, does it matter if I train them in person? Or can I just do it online? Because obviously that's less resource intensive, and if I can accomplish the same goal, that's fantastic. And then I did a follow-up study to look at, well, once we train them, do they retain these skills? So again, we did a simulated project where we asked them to estimate the blood loss. Then I developed a didactic training so that they could better estimate blood loss, and we went through what our postpartum hemorrhage protocol was. So we trained the people that were working in labor and delivery, anesthesiologists, obstetricians, about what they needed to do. And then what we found was that accuracy improved with training. So again, looking at that 0 mark, people were really bad before they did the training. They got better with the training. And they still retain some of the skills 9 months later. So again, I went through these projects and I actually published them. So I have documentation of clinical productivity turning into research publications. But then I took it the next step further, the research impact of these works. So our work on postpartum hemorrhage, like my little simulation projects, actually were the backbone of the state of Illinois postpartum hemorrhage project. So everyone in the state of Illinois, every 2 years, who works in a labor and delivery unit needs to be trained on how to estimate blood loss, and they need to be familiar with how to manage postpartum hemorrhage. So again, you can take your research project on an educational topic and have significant public health impact. Again, my work has been cited by the World Health Organization, so you can take an educational project and really move the ball forward in clinical care. This is another example of what I've done with an educational project, and I'm going to talk a little bit here about how to be creative about taking your educational project and framing it in a way that you can get funded, because again, academic anesthesia, you don't have a ton of time, so you need to get funding to buy out your time to do research. So I did my OB anesthesia fellowship at Northwestern, and here, we do have a pretty diverse group of patients, and I realized that Hispanic patients and Black women were less likely to use labor epidurals than white women. So I was really curious about why there was this disparity, and I really wanted to understand it, and there hadn't been much in the anesthesia literature. There were a couple of papers that showed that there was this racial ethnic disparity, but no one had really looked prospectively. No one had tried to really understand why is there this difference in women using or not using labor analgesia. So the problem that I had, and this is one of my take-home messages, is in my department, there wasn't anyone who could help me develop this research project a little bit more. We were amazing at clinical research. I could do a clinical project with my eyes closed, but something like this that was like more health services, that needed qualitative research, I didn't have the mentorship that I needed in my department. So I went outside of my department, and I found a mentor who was a national expert in healthcare disparities. She actually became the disparities lead for PCORI a few years after we started working together. And I found an obstetrician who was a health services researcher. Again, we worked collaboratively to help develop the projects that moved my research question forward. But here comes the funding issue. So really, if you think about it, this is the reaction you get from most people when you're like, I want to talk about racial ethnic disparities in pain management. They're like, most people deliver in a couple of hours. It hurts, but so what? Who cares, right? So you had to frame the question so that people cared about what you cared about, right? Because again, I'm Hispanic, I feel that there's this burden of pain. How do I sell this story to funders? So 4 million women deliver in the United States every single year. But if you think about it, if minorities are really the number one, minorities are outnumbering whites for births, and they're having more pain, minorities are really suffering more and shouldering the burden of pain in the United States. So now I felt like I had an argument that could resonate with funders, but then you have to find places that will fund your work, right? So you know what you want to do, and ultimately you want to develop an educational project, but there isn't something to just fund that. So you have to deconstruct your question in a way that you can find funding to support it. So the first study I did was basically to quantify the disparities. So I found a funding agency, a foundation, that my work overlapped with. Then the next step was I wanted to do some qualitative work, so I went to ARC, and they funded some qualitative work. So I really took the question, I really built up the argument for why I needed to develop this educational intervention, and then I went to the Robert Wood Johnson, and they funded the development of the counseling tool that we built. So again, everyone naturally draws to the NIH. Everyone wants to be on this career path. You get your T, you get your F, you get your career development award, you get your R, and then it's a happy story, right? But when you're an educational researcher, there isn't that happy story sometimes, because the NIH doesn't fund a lot of educational researchers, so you need to be creative. And there's many places to go, but you just need to think outside of the box as an anesthesiologist sometimes. So there was this article that was published in Academic Medicine last year, 2 years ago, sorry, that talks about where you can go for funding as educational researchers. So there are a lot of places to go. You just need to go and then take your research question and see what you can do that you can fit what funding agencies want. Because at the end of the day, I think finding funding and turning that funding into publications is what matters. And then again, putting a plug in for FAIR. FAIR also has a research and education grant. So it supports 40% of your time for 2 years, $100,000. So again, if you're doing an educational project, FAIR, our own foundation here in anesthesiology, has places for us to go. And I think, again, one of my other big lessons for people that are doing research in anesthesiology is publish your work. If you don't publish your work, you're not disseminating it, so the impact is lost. So again, there's places outside of anesthesiology and ANA. I think every paper has a home. It's just a matter of finding the right home for your paper, and who cares, I get rejected right and left. I turn in grants, I get rejected. I turn in papers, I get rejected. Just turn it around, go somewhere else. So there's other places to go. And so to end with my general career advice, the first thing is find something that you're passionate about. I can't tell you how many people told me when I wanted to do disparities work, they're like, oh, you're so great, your postpartum hemorrhage work was really important, it has that public health impact, why don't you just stay with that? Who cares about disparities? I cared, and I wanted other people to care. So I never gave up on the projects that I loved. But again, going back to the education portfolio, again, if you're doing educational research or education in general, make sure you maintain that teaching portfolio, because there's nothing worse than coming up for promotion being like, ooh, what did I do back in 2016, and going backwards. So keeping it going prospectively is really important. Find the mentors and collaborators who support you and will help you succeed. But I think, again, as early stage investigators, you find those people that are really excited in the department, they have a ton of passion, and then you ask them to do everything because they're awesome, right? You want them to recruit residents, you want them to be the face of your department, but you need to know when to say no, because there's only so much time, and at the end of the day, you really can't do everything and do it well. So go to your mentors. When someone asks you about this great opportunity, say, hey, they just asked me to do this. Do you think I should say yes or no? And it's okay to say no. So again, really lean on your mentors before you make commitments. Let no project go unpublished. I cannot stress this enough, because if you think about it in our specialty, only 20 to 30% of abstracts actually ever turn into publications. If we change that here, and you turned all of your abstracts into a publication, we really could amplify the academic physician scientists in anesthesiology. I think it's really important for all of us to work on getting funded, because again, that will show that there is an importance to the work that is being done in anesthesiology. And then my final ask of you guys is make sure you mentor the next generation of physician scientists. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is for you guys to bring other people along with you. You will be successful. You are here in the room. I know that you have the drive and the passion. Make sure you bring someone else up with you. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and then I'll pull up someone else's slides. I think you're in here.
Thank you. So I think we're doing questions afterwards. Okie dokie. Shine like a rockstar. Anyone know who this is? Curious, guys. Yeah. It actually is. No, I'll tell you at the end. We can Google it. So it is true. For about 2 months, I have now been a new role. I'm the new chair at the University of Chicago, and I absolutely cannot talk about what it means to be a successful chair, because I'm still drinking from the fire hose. And I got to tell you, so I went through the same path like many of you. There's nothing that prepares you for this. Nothing. It's like it really doesn't. So, but I can tell you one thing. What probably motivated me, because I would say I bleed academic anesthesia or anesthesiology, and I just saw an opportunity of like a gem department in the waiting, if you know what I mean, a department that is an outstanding institution, has outstanding physicians, outstanding education, and sort of the missing piece was just to have a little bit more funded research. And sort of trying to build this up, I thought that could be just a really cool opportunity to make an impact on a specialty, and mentor the next generation and help. We need more of us, but if you look around, this is it. Look around, This is not, we're not in cancer research where this room would be, thousands of people, or cardiology. This is it. This will be your peers for the years to come. This is a small group. It's quite eclectic. So this is just a wonderful view from our new place. This is a new hospital looking north. So just disclosures. And I thought it actually quite interesting. So I got a generic email from IRS about my disclosures. And it's like, it's a career development talk. I really don't talk any specific facts anyhow. So these are sort of research fundings and intellectual property, conflict of interest. I've not received any money, but yes, there's a conflict of interest with a startup, and I have a few patents pending. So overview. What I'd like to cover, and we can go over some of the details a little bit then later on, some fundamental truths to academic success. Each of you is individual, right? So you need to tailor your ideas, your goal, the way to your success individually. But I think there's some fundamental truths that are apparent and are just applicable to everyone. And then I want to spend a few minutes to show you from kind of how to design a structure for career development plans that you put in like a FAIR grant or a K grant, because ultimately this is what the reviewers and your peers will expect from you. So building blocks for success. Building blocks for success. You need to develop a research focus, and I'm going to get back to this in a second in a little more detail, and have a clearly defined goal. You need to have the necessary skills to actually deliver the research. You can have a great project, but if you don't have the skills, so for me, for instance, this was one of the reasons why I did some formal genetic epi training, because I had some pharmacogenetics aims in my care ward, and I'm not a trained PhD geneticist, so I needed to convince both myself and, more importantly, the study sections, that I could actually do the research and I could talk the language and understood how modern human genetics was done. You need to become an author. If you don't like writing, this career may not really be for you. The amount of paper you're gonna push and write is extraordinary. So you need to become a good writer. And what I've learned from my mentors is like they actually look at when you are a really good writer, they can tell you your chances of being successful are much higher. It's just clear writing is clear thinking, and that is what I think ultimately what is at the core of being a good scientist. You need to develop time management skills, and I'm going to hone in on this a little bit. You want to look for an environment that is supportive, both within the department but outside of the department. For instance, training opportunities, research infrastructure, having good mentors. Some folks would say that having a good mentor is probably the most important choice you make in your career. I agree to a point, so having good mentors, but one is not enough, because having sort of different mentors in an advisory group is probably even more important. And then think along the lines of, how do I get from where I am right now to the next 5 years that will get me to an R? And this is sort of what it's about. So what makes a good mentor, okay? This is also from, this is probably, I should have sent you the link. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute has a book that is like for early stage investigators. And this is sort of taken from what makes a good mentor, what makes a good mentee. So I'm going to touch on this in a second. So an ideal mentor, should have time for you and listen to you, supportive, protective, and be honest and candid in feedback. Think of, let's say you are someone who folks think can be the #1 tennis player in the world, right? You were not born that way. You are at age 14, 16, 18, you are not the #1. But you may have the potential. So you need a coach who, sorry for my crass language, but kicks you in the ass and try to move you there and tell you where you're weak. And it's not, so one of my mentors, I'm not gonna name any names, but he said, if you only wanna get loved and tell you how great you are, go to your mom. You need someone, which is true. It is actually really true, because one thing you learn is like the tough, honest but tough criticism you get in-house. You don't need to get it from outhouse, no, from the outside, So you will get the critiques, the harsh critiques, and it's your choice. Do you want to get it from sort of your department mentors, from the senior, or do you want to get it from an NIH panel? If you get to the NIH and avoid that round of in-house criticism, you will fail. It will be a fail, or the likelihoods of success are much lower. So it's good to have that candid, that honest feedback. But on the other hand, being nurturing, someone who has the experience and can give you a realistic perspective. Now, these are in more details what you should ask from a scientific mentor. And this is really defining the research questions, being hypothesis-driven, literature, help you with the methodology, help you with critiquing your writing and your drafts. Budget, this is something we often really overlook, and then help you with applying for funding. So this is a cartoon I like, signs of a good mentor. I'm not going to comment too much on this. Now, what makes a good mentee, okay? What makes a good mentee is we would like to see in you passion, enthusiasm for research. We want to know how can we help you to get from A to B over the next 5 years. So you need to tell us your expectations, right? Where is your passion, And only if we know this, we can really help you. Be responsive, work hard, and that is something, without hard work, you will not succeed. That is, in my opinion, a given. Be proactive, be willing to listen, and accept feedback even if it's tough. And often, one thing that, when Paloma mentioned this, we think about this, at any given time, we are always both mentor and mentee. It just shifts. You're already mentors, for the medical students. You are always, at any given time, mentor and mentee. So this is often a long-term relationship that sometimes lasts a lifetime. So what we expect from you, I'm not going to read this to you, but these are sort of more specifically, I think, what a mentor would ask from you. So work hard is really there. Now, some of the fundamental truths about achieving academic success. And so I completed last week meeting one-on-one with all of sort of my new faculty, and it was interesting that how much interest there is to do research. It just seemed that there was a lot of guidance missing. So And I think this prepared me well for this talk. So one thing that we cannot teach, and if you don't have the passion for research, it's probably not right for you. That is something, like Alex Evers, one of my mentors, said, you can get the horse to the water, but you cannot make it drink. So if you don't have the passion for research, it's probably not for you. But if you have a passion for research, also like Paloma said, you should develop a passion for a topic, for a theme, and develop and become an expert in this area. So follow your passion is a good start. That's one of the most important advices I would give to you guys. Solve important problems. And this is something, so there are a ton of problems, and sometimes there are low-hanging fruits. And yes, I understand, to get started, it's good to have a few publications. Solve important problems. The difference between hard-use investigators, Nobel laureates, is not the amount of time they spend, often not even the methodology, but they really address important questions. So you use your time wisely and focus to solve important questions. So for the MD PhDs who look for a lab-based career, you need to be mechanistic. You need to answer fundamental questions of biology, of mechanisms. Try to solve important problems. Stick to this, and then really come up with solutions. In clinical research, really answer questions that have an impact for patients. Yes, we can do all retrospective studies in this and this, but try to advance the field and try to answer important problems. Develop focus. So this is one of the things that I am guilty as hell for this. So think of you, or most of you, or like if you were like me, we're pluripotent, right? You during residency, you spend a week in the ICU and have great ideas. Then you're regional, and suddenly you study here, a study here, a study there. So if you if you, let's say you have the ability to publish five papers in 2 years, okay? Would you rather publish those 5 papers on one theme, or have sort of one paper in one theme, have 5 papers in different themes? Where do you get known? Is only if you stick to one topic. So this is one thing that one of my mentors, when I came with a ton of ideas, said, Peter, you need 3 things: focus, 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 okay? And it's true. So in order to get known, you need to focus on one thing, or one theme, and don't ignore everything else. There's so much cool research out there, and I'm a very excitable person about research. Yesterday we had astronomy and astrophysics. Like, wow, wouldn't that be cool to go to Chile, right, and help them do something? It would be just profoundly cool, right? If you like science, if you like discovery, then you get easily excitable. So that's good and bad, and because it's bad because it's a distraction. Focus on one thing. You need to focus on one. This is the way to become rich and famous. I'm sorry, successful. So deciding, so this goes along these lines, but also along the lines of time management. It's equally important to decide what you want to do versus deciding what not to do. And sometimes saying no is actually more important for your career than saying yes. Now this is something all the grant reviewers will immediately pick up on: rigor. Be known for the best methodological approach. And this is true in basic and clinical research epidemiology. Have the best methods. You will impress the reviewers. You will get bonus points for this. If you have a shady methodology and have leaps and it doesn't really make sense, people will know this and they will remember. So if you're known, this is something you want to be not just squeaky clean, but your methods need to be just perfect, okay? So this is not just statistical rigor, but methodological rigor is really important. That is something that may be sort of the make and break in papers and grant applications. Now more about sort of personal traits. One thing is don't give up. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and the number of times the more senior guys in the room have been rejected is unbelievable. You need to expect rejection, and so just don't give up. Just don't give up, And it's there are a little more crass ways of saying this. I'm not gonna, but it's just stand up, dust off, let it sink in. Don't give up. This is a small group, and the more we can actually help you to get into the K&R phase, the better for the specialty. Just don't give up. So there are a few sort of motivational things that I really find it. There's no difference between sports and in a way us. So persistence can change failure into extraordinary achievement, and I truly believe this. So do not quit. Do not learn from your mistakes. I may not fully subscribe to the fact that you only learn from failures, because often you truly actually learn from your successes too. But learn from your rejections. It is extremely frustrating, right? You get your first grant or first paper, and you get a lot of like really harsh criticisms and this. But more often than not, the reviewers actually have really good points. So, just de-emotionalize this experience, get back to a later date, and then just see if there are really good points that the reviewers make to improve you. And more often than not, this is true. So learn from your failures. A point is, if you don't work hard, you will not succeed. I think that is a given. Research is not so. Sometimes, when you're in fairly non-academic departments, and you get a research day, right? And people use this as a half a day off or this and this. It's like, it's an easy day. I think our research days, the ones who take this seriously, are harder than an OR day. And so one of my former good friends, Mike Crowder, who is now chair in Seattle, he said his OR day was his fun day. So the hard work often is really in the lab and on the research days. Because the thing is, in research, no one tells you what to do. No one. If you don't do anything, just tweedledee, no one's gonna just like, hey, you didn't do this. Our world is right. We come into hospital at whatever early hour in the morning. We have a schedule, so we are told what to do, right? It's like, yes, sir, right? You're a coal mine, you work for 12 hours and go home, right? And it's like we are told. I have no influence on what the hospital will tell us, right? In research and science, if you're not motivated, if you're not driven, you have to be motivated. And if you're motivated, and couple this with hard work, I think that will ultimately result in your success. One thing that I have learned the hard way, I have to say, so I'm not a natural at this, is to understand that time is your most important resource and use it wisely. Isn't it fun? You get a K award, 75% protected time. I can go out to the conferences and chat around the planet and this and this. Oh, and this committee, right? So much time, right? And then it's like, when do you actually have the time to do research papers and grants? When is that time, right? That time that is really important. So this is an interesting short paper from Google Incorporated. It was a corporate email about time management strategy, and I took this a little bit to heart. And the main messages, and I've learned this now for the hard way in a way, is like there are really two different classes of people: the managers and the makers. For the managers, and I can attest to this right now, is like my day is really in half an hour intervals, right? And every half an hour, there's really a new issue, right? New set of people, and you talk, and and you try to make decisions and just move through the day. If you're a maker, and if you're sort of a researcher, then you need make time. You can just not work in half-hour intervals, I'm finished this paper in half hours. It's just absolutely impossible. So you need to create make time on your calendar. You need to block out time, hours, when it's for papers, for grants, that is think time. And you do not schedule anything into that time. This is your time to really, finish the paper, write that grant, and protect that time. This is absolutely crucial. Along these lines, avoid distractions. And nowadays, if you're excitable, you're often easily distracted. You need to focus during that time, especially with writing. And I found writing, that time is the most difficult to avoid. So it's the easiest time to get distracted and really not sort of focus on this. I love this slide, weapons of mass distraction. And this is so true. This is so true. It is so easy. It's like, an email. And one thing that I've heard in a time management seminar, disable the inbox alert. So just disable it now. Do it now. This is how Arnold would say it, do it now. I'm Austrian, so I can do this. So disable this today. It is irrelevant. You don't, unless this is like some sort of crisis, you do not need a sort of an alert that alerts you that you get an email. So especially during those writing hours. So avoid work distractions. And now in terms of career, right? It is so easy, to get sucked into some specialties and do this, too many non-important meetings, volunteer for every opportunity professional. There will be time for you to do this, right? And so right now, at the beginning of your career, you should focus on 3 things. And these things only. Research papers, grants. Forget everything else. I know this is harsh. This is probably a little bit an oversimplification, but focus on research papers and grants. Because ultimately, 5 years, 7, 10 years from now, you look back and it's like, wow, I really made my career. So there's really no magic formula for success. Hard work, careful listening, and 100% commitment. Now, in the last few minutes, really just talk a little bit more specifics in terms of how to structure a career development plan from a K Award perspective or a career development grant perspective. So K Awards, 3 to 5 years in length. And the one thing for those of you who are in preparation for a career development grant, you have to understand that these grants have 2 components. There's a research component and a training component. If you fail to address this, you will fail that grant. It will not be granted. So the research plan needs to be, of course, well done, and it's like any other research grant, but you need to have a good training plan. And the goal for career development grants, being American Heart, being K Award, FAIR, IRS, is to get you towards independence. Okay, independence means, in the eyes of the NIH, that you will be competitive for R1 funding. So I'm not going to go through this in detail. This is what is expected on the career development portion. So that means you need to have the necessary knowledge and research skills in a scientific area relevant to the candidate's career goals. So, for instance, courses. But it's actually you define where you want to go. And if you have that kind of 5-year perspective, it's like, hey, I really want to be known for, let's be an expert in pharmacogenetics, an expert in pain management, expert in X, Y, and Z. Then look back, what do I need in order to become an expert? And that may include didactic coursework. So some core elements like writing skills, grantsmanship, everyone should possess. But then really analyze your weaknesses. For instance, I had really no formal training in human genetics, so it was obvious that I needed really some formal training. So I took actually the human genomics class with the WashU PhD students, and boy, it was like it was an interesting experience. Like usually, like where they were, but you need to analyze your weaknesses critically, and maybe you actually do not need a lot of additional training. If you're an MD, PhD, and your line of research is very consistent what you did during your PhD, then you may only need a bits and pieces, and what you really need time is time in the lab. So we talked about this. I'm going to skip this. So skills that everyone needs to master, as I mentioned, scientific writing, grantsmanship. If you're involved in patient-oriented research, ethical conduct of research, biostatistics, I personally think that if you even look at Nature, some of the statistics that are in Nature papers are atrocious. It's something that should be never published. The quality of some of the biostatistical analyses in some of the, I would say, the Nature papers, I'm not talking about astronomy, I'm talking about basic science, biomedical science, I think is really not on par with clinical research. So I do think everyone needs to be able to, at a basic level, conduct and know enough about biostatistics, study design, and then ultimately how to become a good manuscript reviewer. So one important point is your career development plan needs to be individualized. Do not copy, a template and then insert it in your K grant, and you just fill in a little bit, names, because everyone's background is different. We have guys who are PharmDs or MD PhDs. You need to tailor the training to your grant and your background. And you need to make a compelling case why you need a K award. So explain exactly how the additional training will get you from basically a pluripotent stem cell to a fully developed scientist. Be specific. So, and here, speaking of on the lines of being specific, these are samples the way it looks like. And I think I had permission to copy them. There's no confidential information. It's really broken out: educational goals, research goals, professional goals, and then exactly when do you what. This is a different format from the Harvard system: research training, year 1, year 2, didactic coursework, lecture seminars, national meetings. This is a similar, but a little bit different. Research tasks, courses. This is one I like a lot. This really breaks down year by year. I do in research, finish here, and then grant writing, didactic coursework, where someone who reviews this knows exactly, this is how you're going to go from A to B. And most common flaws are that you have an overly ambitious training grant, diffuse, and this is, I think, one thing, especially about career development, if it's not really individualized to you. So this is my last slide. I want to just, with a vote of confidence, just stick to it. Don't give up. And the one thing about keywords you need to remember is keywords, if you are persistent, you will get it. You know why? Because one cannot renew keywords. At any given time, there will be always new keywords. That is not true for R. So if you really have a decent research plan, you will be able to get a keyword because there, at any given time there will be new words available. So thank you very much, and I think we're going to have the panel afterwards. Thank you.
Dr. Nagele, whose picture was that at the beginning?
Anyone? I'm serious.
Sid Vicious?
No.
Johnny Rotten.
Maynard James Keegan. So the tool. I know the tool.
Okay. We need a little help here. It seems that we're stuck.
It was the side angle. She's in a profile.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's taking 2 screens.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't solve this.
So they gotta go left or right.
I just can't see where to X out of here.
See if I can help. I don't know if I can. Do we see the cursor? Oh, there it is. Okay, let's go there. Other way. Let's go this way. There we go. Now I've got it.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
There's 2 screens. That's why.
There we go. I think we have it. Well, good morning. And thank you for the invitation to come and share some time with you this morning and some thoughts. It's fun to be back and see so many friends and peers and so many emerging leaders of our specialty and our future. So this is a real delight for me. And it's fun to be able to follow Peter and Paloma. I think you'll see that there are so many themes that weave through our talks. You know, I reflect on Paloma's comments about mentorship being so critically important, and the fact that at any time we are both givers and receivers of mentorship. And Peter's points about managing time and making time for that creativity and for that thinking and for that strategizing, so critically important. So you'll see some common themes woven through my talk. But I thought today what I would do, given that I have most recently moved out of my long career as an academic anesthesiologist and intensivist, and really my identity as a clinician-educator into more of a physician executive position. So I wanted to share some thoughts with you as I reflect on my career journey, and thought I would start today with actually describing what is the job. What is it to be a physician executive? What are the things that we think about? How do we spend our time? Maybe then a little bit of a thought or discussion around what are these experiences and skills? So as young people are thinking about if this is something that I might want to do, and to echo what Peter said and Paloma said too, find something you're passionate about. Think about the work you want to do. Think about the problems you want to solve. So I want to share with you a little bit about what that is, and then we can talk about some of the pearls that I've learned along the way. So current landscape and trends. Really, these are the things that I spend my day, and all healthcare executives spend their time thinking about. It's really around economic pressure and uncertainty. I think the only thing we're sure of is that we're not sure what's coming, right? The uncertainty is really, and particularly with healthcare reform and the real political nature of healthcare financing, it's hard to predict exactly where we're going to be, but we know that the pressures are there, that reimbursement, that payer mix, all those things have real downward pressure on our economics. So thinking about how we continue to support our missions in that light. The social determinants of health and our aging demographics, I think, add to those economic pressures and our ability to deliver effective health care in that climate. Cybersecurity is a huge thing, not something I really had to think about much before. I did my HIPAA training and, was very dutiful and compliant, but now thinking about systems and how we serve up information, make it accessible to our clinicians with the threats that we see every single day. There are thousands, our health system filters out thousands and thousands of hacker hits, and our chief information officer just recently gave a presentation. It was mind-blowing to think about how many people out there are trying to get into our health systems. Our health information is far more valuable on the black market now than credit card information, and so it's a real threat. Physical security, I will say as well. Hospitals are very soft targets, and it's unfortunate we live in a climate where we have to think about how do we harden those targets, how do we provide safety without making our facilities feel like prisons, keeping certain people out and perhaps the feeling of keeping others in. The whole age of consumerism. How do we reach our patients and what they as healthcare consumers want? And there are many, many disruptions in that space. And so being strategic and thinking about where one's going to meet the consumers and how we develop the competencies to actually be able to provide. Drug shortages, we all face those drug shortages. Now being in charge of supply chain, it has a very different pressure than the one on the front lines thinking about how am I going to deliver care today. Now it's on the other side trying to think about how do I make sure our providers and our clinicians have the tools that they need to deliver the care that they do. Emergency preparedness, not just the security threats, but tornadoes, hurricanes, storms, now being responsible for the provision of ongoing care for the patients, but ongoing care then for the entire staff. And how do you think through those kinds of plans? Workforce burnout is a real issue. You all confront that in thinking about how do we restore that joy in practice? How do we really create an environment where people who do really amazing things and work hard, but we can support them in a way that brings meaning and purpose to their lives and creates more sustainability for the hard work that they do. And then the emerging technologies and how to keep up with it all and trying to stay in that space and be able to deliver the dollars to make the capital investments to invest in those emerging technologies. And then thinking about how those emerging technologies will disrupt our workforce. So one of the things I'm dealing with right now is we have union negotiations this year. 2 of my big important contracts are up. And so the worry about as we introduce robots in the finance office, or we do introduce cleaning robots, what is that impact on that workforce? And how are we thoughtful and sensitive to the fact that these are human lives and livelihoods? And thinking through, is it that we displace them, or does it give us opportunity to retrain them and replace them in other and maybe more meaningful ways? So all things that I spend a lot of time actually learning and addressing in my job. And the strategic imperatives, a little tongue-in-cheek, but honestly, all of us are compelled, right? Do more, do whatever we do better, and do it for less. And that really is, at the end of the day, how I focus my time and support our clinicians and our physicians to do that work. So the skills and experiences for people who may be budding C-suite executives out there, what are the kinds of things that, as I reflect on my career, that prepared me for a job as a COO? So honestly, being very operationally grounded. And I think as anesthesiologists and intensivists, that we come by this rightfully. We are very globally minded, if you will, within our hospital communities. There's not a nook or cranny of our hospitals and health systems with which we don't interface. So I think that this is a real natural for anesthesiologists and critical care physicians in particular, thinking of my own background. Finance and accounting. Being able to know your way around a P&L and a balance sheet. And that's not something that as physicians we're typically very well trained in. In fact, when I went to medical school, I had a liberal arts and humanities background with some pre-med, never really took a business course. So I think Peter made the point, don't be afraid to invest in additional training and education. So, we just don't come by these skills and the vocabulary necessarily in the course of our medical training. So don't be afraid to, and actually more than don't be afraid, actually strongly consider that you're going to need to go get some additional tools to be an effective executive if this in fact isn't part of your skill set. It certainly wasn't part of mine prior to going for business training. Management, and what I mean by this, it's not just how to organize the work environment and do things right or in the right way. It's really around people. And how do you identify talent? How do you develop talent? How do you manage that talent? How do you inspire that talent? Right? You can't be a leader if you don't have any followers. And so that's a whole entire skill set, and I think it's important to have those kinds of experiences and to really be thoughtful about and mindful as you are given opportunities where you can manage groups of people and lead teams. Again, I think a very natural for anesthesiologists, but that's an important experience and skill set. I already mentioned talent development, learning how to identify the right talent, and I can't say I always got this right. So that is an important focus. How do you identify the right skills, and then how do you develop those people in ways that you're always thinking about succession planning, you're always thinking about upward mobility for your teams. People want to be developed and they want to learn and stretch in new ways. And so that's a critically important skill for leaders. And then of course how you influence people. Right? We tend to be, as physicians, very data-driven, very grounded in evidence. Well, that's great. You have to have that, what I call the very rational skill set and the ability to talk and about things that seem very rational or grounded in data and your analyses. But you have to remember you're dealing with people, and we are irrational, emotional beings as well. And so some of my early big faux pas were going hard charging with my plan. And a very solid plan, if I say so myself, except I wasn't thinking about what's this really going to mean to the people this is going to impact, and how are they going to shoot down what sounds like a bullet-clad plan. And so you've got to think about talking and addressing people and developing your strategies, understanding that people will react in very irrational, emotional ways, but that's equally important to having a plan based in data and evidence. Attributes. So this is something I think about when people ask me what makes a good leader. These are some things, and I've drawn these as a bit of a spectrum because I think good leaders are principled. You have to have your true north, right? I love the quote, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. That's not a good leader. A good leader knows where they're going and is very principled. But at the same time, it's not always a linear pathway to where we want to go and where we want to lead our teams. So one has to be pragmatic and always, being able to sway and move as necessary, not because the goal or the end game has changed, but because it may be necessary, a tactical move, still getting to my true north. And so good leaders know how to move between principled and pragmatic. Otherwise, you just blow in the wind and you're wish-washy, and people lose confidence in a leader like that. You need to be very strategic. You need to have the big picture. You need to have that 30,000, 50,000, 60,000 foot view. But you also have to be facile in the weeds, as I say. You've got to understand your operations. You've got to understand your finance, your revenue cycle. You have to understand the things that you're responsible for, even if and when you delegate and you have other good people tending to those things. You've got to be facile because you've got to understand when they are and aren't delivering, because it's going to have tremendous impact. So good leaders move in that space. As I mentioned earlier, we're very data-driven and being grounded in learning what data you need, understanding and being able to determine if it's valid, being able to analyze it, cut through it. But there are times where we don't have all the data that we want, and we can't be indecisive when we are dealing with ambiguity. And good leaders, I think, are able to move in that space. We often get selected for our positions by what we do, so that's what I call lead by doing, what projects you've led, what initiatives you've developed, what papers you've written, what grants you've been awarded. So we're often selected for our roles because of what we've done, but a good leader at one point makes that transition and you lead by coaching or lead by leading. And that's not a skill that's necessarily taught, but it's critically important as I reflect back on my transition. And I think it's important that leaders are courageous. You got to live up to your convictions. And yet you have to be humble, right? You have to understand you don't have all the answers. You've got to be a good listener, be willing to take input. And so those, I think, are really good attributes of leaders, and good leaders are able to live at both ends of that spectrum, and transition is necessary. So as I think about my journey and advice or pearls, number one is focus on being excellent. I never ever set out to get the job I have today. I just was happy as a young physician being an excellent clinician and educator. It's what fed my soul. And my focus was being excellent in that space and being exceptional in that space. And it's through the excellence and your commitment to being where you are and doing your very best every day that people recognize that you have something. And that's where the opportunities to do something more will come from. So that leads to my second point: don't get over your skis. I have young people come to me all the time for mentorship and career advice, and it's one of the favorite things that I do. But people are already, barely out of residency or fellowship, and they're already aiming for the CEO job or something, or the dean's job. Like, don't get over your skis. Don't get ahead of yourself. There's a lot of living to do and a lot of learning to do between where you are and where you think you want to go. The second piece of this is that, how do you know you want to be the dean or you want to be the CEO? Do you even know what those jobs entail? So the other thing I tell people is, don't focus on the titles on the door. Focus on the work you want to do and the problems you want to solve, because it may not necessarily align with how you like to spend your time. So that's what I mean by don't get over your skis. It's been said before, mentorship is everything. When I reflect on my career and the few people who were really instrumental in guiding my career, they saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. It's everything. Mentorship, the people in your lives that will open doors for you or push and nudge you in directions where you may not feel that you have the skill set or the ability. Trust in those people. And as was said before, recognize that what you say and do matters. You never know who's watching, and you never know what kind of influence you're going to have on the people around you. And that's critically important, and that's something we all need to live up to. Don't be afraid to fail. It takes a lot of courage to step into these roles. And it's not easy, and you can feel very lonely and very vulnerable in some of these roles, and anybody in a leadership position knows that. But again, I think if you have that right combination of courage and humility, and you go in there thinking, okay, is this a job I can do? Do I have the resources and the skills and the wherewithal to do it? And when I've done it and I've been successful, will it have mattered to me? Will it have been important for me to have done this? I think those are good questions for you to ask. And don't be afraid to make mistakes and fail along the way, as long as you are willing to be honest and examine those failures and those mistakes and learn from them. We've all been there, but it does take being very vulnerable, making yourself very vulnerable to step into these leadership roles. And in the end, leadership is all about service. You may be the boss, but as I said, you can't be the boss or the leader if no one's willing to follow. And leadership is a huge investment. You serve your organization, you serve your teams, you serve your peers. It's really about service. And so think about that as you think about what it means to step into a leadership role. But with that, I think I'll stop with my comments. I understand we'll have time for questions and answers, so thank you for your attention.
Great. Thanks to all three speakers for those great talks. So we'll actually entertain questions from the audience. So we'll just ask people to, I guess, use those mics that are in the center there if you want to come up and ask questions to any of our panelists here. But just while we're waiting for some people to approach the mic here, I guess I'll get things started. So Dr. Nagele and Dr. Hill, I'll direct this to either you can answer, both of you, because you're both in very senior leadership positions in your respective organizations. So as a junior person, one thing I find often happens is I have senior folks coming to me saying, "You'd be perfect for this. I need you to do this for me." And that goes against, trying to maintain the focus that all three of you had spoken about. So as you, in a leadership position, how do you think we should best approach this as junior, or as assistant professors or as junior staff in your organizations? How would you best receive a no without taking it personally, I guess?
Okay, I'm sorry. That's not an easy one because the question is what's the motivation, right? Ultimately, and so it could be really well motivated, and it could be an opportunity for you to really. It's like a perfect next step, right? On the other hand, it could be not really be well motivated and just fill the needs of the department, the hospital, or and they just need a warm body, personally, basically to do that job, and it may really be a crazy time sink. And so one example that I've seen, for instance, in a lot of the young, energetic, and passionate faculty who really don't know what to do. Sometimes they're sucked in writing a lot of book chapters or so. So this is something and it may be too harsh that book chapters should only be written by full professors, but I think it gets to the point where it's like, this is not a good time and not a good investment of time and energy of a junior faculty, unless you're actually really experts in expertise, and this may be the case. You may have really rare training, that is. You trained at NASA or whatever, and this is really applicable. No, I'm not kidding. This could be the case where you truly are the expert, and by all means, write that book chapter. But more often than not, it's more to fill the needs of an organization than yours. On the other hand, ultimately we're soldiers, if you know what I mean, and so sometimes we just have to soldier up and say yes, So, but I think it needs to be a conversation, right? Especially if it's more like bigger leadership roles, fellowship director or associate program director. These where these are big roles, and a lot of time, and that's requires, I would say, conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and. I agree with Peter. Sometimes those opportunities aren't always in your best interest. So this gets back to where it's important that you define for yourself what are the problems you want to solve, what are the things that are really important to you, Is this busy work? Is this meeting a need? And sometimes that's fine. Being a good citizen and a good team player and fulfilling a need is fine. So you've got to size up. What is that kind of investment? And is it going to be an investment, as I said earlier? Can I do this successfully? Will I have what I need to do it? And when I'm done with it, will it have mattered? And so I think going through those three questions is critically important. I think about, one of my mentors who offered me the opportunity to create that preoperative assessment program. And for me, that was such a key to so many other things in my career. And so that was one where I was happy to have said, yes, absolutely yes. But there are other things that come along that just really, as I size them up, and it's hard, right? Because being asked by someone you respect, admire, or someone in an authority position, it can be very flattering. That has that sort of seductive pull that, gee, I'm being tapped for something. But, resist being flattered. Because when you're talented, and this is a room of really talented people, they will come, and they will come fast and furious, and you've got to be, it may not seem that way in your seats today, but you will have ample opportunity. So maybe the important thing is, how do I politely decline without shutting the door? So this is also advice I've been asked to give people, and I say I think the way to talk to someone who's offered you some opportunity, when you've gone through that soul searching and decided it's not for you, is to say, I'm really flattered. I aspire to such and such kind of opportunities, but I think this isn't quite aligned with what I want to do, by signaling that you're thoughtful about what you want, by signaling that you do have other aspirations and maybe providing a little bit of insight into what those are, and then to politely decline and say, but if you have something, in these areas, would love to hear about those opportunities. So it's a way to graciously get out of something without shutting the door to other kinds of possibilities. You need to signal that this is something that you do have other aspirations. So hopefully that's a little helpful.
That's great. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Mike Mathis. I'm a cardiac anesthesiologist at the University of Michigan. I just finished a 232 and intimidated to be launching into a K ward. And one of the problems that I think all of the panelists spoke to is forming a mentorship team and finding the right mentors. And one of the challenges that I've encountered, and I'd love to hear more about what our panelists think about this, is you need mentors to fill different. There's different qualities about mentors that make them great mentors for you, and you'll find that no one mentor has all of these qualities. So naturally, you'll have a mentorship team. When you have a mentorship team, I've sometimes been struggling with the cohesiveness of that team. So sometimes one mentor will not know exactly what another mentor is advising you on, and how to reconcile that. How to have mentors understand where they may fit into your career plan. And be able to give you, rather than individual mentorship advice, kind of a cohesive message. So I'd love to hear anything about that from each of our panelists.
I can start with that because I have an anesthesiologist, an obstetrician, and a health services researcher. So I think the key for me has been, because everyone's coming from such diverse backgrounds, is making sure that everyone's on the same page. So obviously Cindy Wong was my anesthesiologist mentor. She is a phenomenal physician scientist and has done a lot organizationally. So she has a certain pathway that she saw my career going. But Jane Hall, my patient safety mentor, Romana, my disparities mentor, they all thought different things. So my key was getting them in the same room together or getting them on the phone together regularly. And for the most part, people that mentor you really want to help you. They're passionate about you. They want to see you succeed. So ask someone else to do the scheduling for you, because I found sometimes dealing with their schedules is like a nightmare in its own.
But make sure you find a time where everyone can be on the phone together, so that way if someone says, I really think you need to do X, but everyone else says you shouldn't because it's going to be too much time and it's not really going to advance your career, they're all together and then they can like talk it out amongst themselves. Like, I'm a huge fan of when you need to say no, like Lorraine said, say, thank you so much for this opportunity, but my mentors really thought that, I should focus on X, Y, or Z instead. So, but please think of me in the future. So that's what I did. I just got everyone on the phone together because then there's consensus amongst them.
Another good one. I think, so there are certain scenarios, right? The easiest one is you have a primary mentor in your department who is also, you work, on that research, That's fairly straightforward because this person can advise you both on the research, right, to advance the research, become, an expert in that field, and also advise you how to advance, in our specialty, right? The challenge is, let's say you do research that is outside of a specialty, or the primary mentor, the research mentor is cardiologist or OBGYN or because they truly do not understand our specialty, right? Or the kind of conferences you should go, for instance, attend the AUA meeting every year, they would never know this, right? So then it becomes a little bit difficult. I do think you need a primary mentor, without a doubt, who takes ownership. But I understand how challenging this can be if this person is outside of the specialty, right? You have to also understand how K awards were designed. They were designed that it was with the PhD model in mind, right? So you work in a lab. The lab is funded by our grants, and that's why the Ks are funded that way. It would be a postdoc, a fellow who would basically get a token amount of money to do his or her own research and have the salary, taken care of. That was the model, right? So you had one cohesive group, and this would be the mentor, right? And nowadays, especially in clinical research, that is really not the case. So it's, I agree. I think if there's really a divergence of opinions, you probably need to get the group together in the room, or just identify one primary mentor and say, this, I will really follow your advice on X, Y, and Z, and make it clear to the others. I know it may ruffle some feathers with others. I get this. Not an easy one.
One quick addition to the comments on mentorship. I think we have to be careful. Terms have a lot of meaning, right? So the difference between a mentor and someone who may be a career consultant, right? And trying to think in your mind, mentors, and I think it was said before by both Paloma and Peter, was that, they're vested in your success. There's a personal relationship there, personal professional relationship, but there's something to that mentorship relationship, and that's why I think those assigned mentor programs, while completely well intended, these relationships have to grow organically, and so it may be that if you approach this, that this individual is going to provide research consultancy to this group. It goes back to what Peter said, it's bidirectional, and there is a responsibility of those who are seeking the input of a mentor. And so if you think about when you bring in, or your department or somebody brings in a consultant, they have a series of this is what we'd like to achieve, this is what we have, this is where we're having problems. And if you bring that to that mentorship relationship, you may find you get more back. But sometimes when we use the term mentor, it's kind of like they're going to direct things for me. They're going to, and they've got my best interest in mind. And I think one has to be careful about the nature of these relationships.
Hello, my name's Kate Leslie. I'm from Melbourne in Australia, and with Hilary Grocott, we're doing a session on publication at the end of the day. My question is around being a clinician scientist with the emphasis on clinician. So nobody wants to be the funny old professor with the Nobel Prize who is dangerous in the operating room. All of us as clinician scientists by obligation are working part-time as anesthesiologists. I have a few ideas about how to be a good anaesthetist and be a good researcher, and there are loads of reasons why you need to be great clinicians in order to be credible in your department. But I wondered if anyone on the panel would like to share their ideas about how to remain a competent anesthesiologist while doing great science?
Okay. This is something that I think is particularly the case in the U.S. And I think for most of us who either Europe or Australia, that strict, for instance, career development grant obligation, to the federal government, where you need to, or an affair grant, need to spend 75% in research. So this, I think, is for the physician scientists who do lab-based research, I think is really critical. I think they will be judged to compete against full-time basic scientists, and I think the spending 4 days a week in a lab is really important. That's probably the only way to succeed. For clinician scientists, where you have then research coordinators and some of the mechanics of doing research, you can outsource into professional hands. You may actually not need 75% protected research time, but we, I think, have that kind of hard rule. So in terms of advice, how to maintain, I think, first of all, I think you should come out of residency as a good anesthesiologist. That would be a good start. And then it's more probably maintenance. So I know from just our own example at WashU that some individuals then really choose to only work in a very specific clinical area. Not saying anything, confidential. Mike Crowder, for instance, elected mostly to work in neuroanesthesia. Some of them are junior, only do now critical care to spend 25 to 30% of his or her time only in critical care, and they, I think, still provide outstanding clinical care. But it's a challenge if you have to work, if the expectation is like you need to be at expert level in cardiac, in critical care, and that I think gets difficult. So the bottom line is probably pick one area and then try to really become an expert in that area. Understanding that with 1 day a week in the OR or two, it would be very hard to go too broad.
I agree completely. And I think also that as you get older, you need to narrow your scope of practice even further. And I think it's good to really think about trying to do a subspecialty that is not highly technical. And one that maybe is more, cerebral. And neuroanesthesiology is a good example of that. And you have to bear in mind that you need to do some of the procedures and not give them all to the residents. And that's one of the trickiest things about being an attending, is stealing procedures off residents. But I think they understand that. Yes. Two final things: you need someone to call when you don't know what to do. My sister's an anesthesiologist, and we're always on the phone, what do you do about this? And the other is to find someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, look, it's time to go, or it's time to upskill. So thank you for your remarks.
Hello. So I think I'm not a physician. I'm only a PhD, and that's probably good for everybody.
Out.
Sorry. So my question is, does a PhD fit into an anesthesiology department? Considering that I have no clinical background, and is this going into anesthesiology research as a neuroscientist fit with the larger goals of the field?
Absolutely.
But
no, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I think if I speak from the mini period of being a chair, I think what a chair may look for is that you're a first-rate scientist, or have a potential to become a first-rate scientist, right? And that you need to ideally fit into the specialty in some way, right? That can be loosely defined, right? Yeah. But think about pain, right? I mean that is a whole field where you can be as translational as you want to be, right? Super basic pain mechanism, and we at WashU we had the example that even outstanding PhD scientists then started to apply some of their findings in some phase 1 or phase 2 trials. So this whole spectrum. So absolutely yes, absolutely without a doubt. Yes.
Thank you.
Don't be shy. We have 5 more minutes.
Actually, I do have one question. This is really for all the panelists, but was there a time when that you can think of in your careers when your particular interest and your passion, which as you all relate is so important, didn't necessarily align with that of your mentors or with that of your department? And did you adapt yourself, or was that a time when you decided to change direction or just keep looking?
So I can answer that. So like I said, I had an anesthesiologist mentor, I had a health services research mentor, I had an obstetrician mentor. And I think because I love research and I love working with students, a lot of times as junior faculty, I would get can you help X, Y, and Z with their project? And can you help them with their project? And one of my mentors, again, who was my boss, was telling me, will you help Elizabeth Lane with this project? And so then you just have to take it on because, she's your boss, you have to say yes, and you can't really, and then you have your other mentors kind of yelling at you for not doing other things. So I think that it's good and bad in that it does help you develop your science in areas that are not in just your wheelhouse. I think it's always good to have a little bit of diversity, but too much is a bad thing. So again, going back to the saying no, getting everyone together and then helping other people help you say no is good. But yeah, I definitely have had to negotiate the being told to do things that you don't want to do, and then having to figure out how do you keep that focus that Pedro was talking about.
So I would say, yes, there are research careers that are linear or sort of linear. And I really don't have real data to support this, but my guess is most of our careers are nonlinear. It may go a little bit this way and this way. My own example, I started as a resident. I did my residency in Vienna, and there was a very, I would say, robust clinical research. And most residents were at some point engaged in clinical research. But I always wanted to do basic science, so that's why I actually came to WashU and worked for 2 years as a research fellow, just basically full-time basic science. And I really thought I would continue this, but then you're back in the OR, you really enjoyed the sort of the clinical research questions. So for me, it was really back and forth. And then I joined WashU in 2005, and within a year, I basically decided to leave basic science. So it's completely non-linear, and so. Did this hurt my career? Possibly, because you try to become an expert in a field and then, you're not pursuing this, and so probably. But there's, in the end, it's you need to be happy, right? You need to find your passion, and if you realize this is really not the way, it's okay to change directions. It really is,
Hi, my name is Caitlin Sutton, pediatric and obstetric anesthesiologist. I've gotten a lot of great advice from both Dr. Toledo and Dr. Hill over the years, most especially from Dr. Hill, who told me that another year of training is something you will never regret, which is true, and she has exemplified that for me. Speaking of extra years of training, I wanted to ask you, all of you have done things in your training that, as you were mentioning, weren't necessarily linear, an MPH, an MBA. If you know that that's on the horizon for you, it's something that is going to improve what you're passionate about and your ability to answer those questions, what would you recommend about the timing of doing that? So I'm a first year attending, so I know eventually I want to do an MA in ethics or maybe beyond that. But it seems quite early to say, I've done this for 1 year, now I want to start pursuing that. So what would you recommend about timing as far as those things?
Hello, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
In terms of the timing, I don't know that I would be prescriptive in terms of the number of years. I think it's important to have a little bit of experience under your belt because you draw on that as you learn in whatever domain. And even in business school, I wasn't running a business, but I was able to draw on a lot of my experiences. And I happened to be out of residency, I think 8 years when I started my MBA. But the most important thing to think about in thinking of the timing is, will I have the opportunity to apply my newfound knowledge and skills? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it becomes a piece of paper on a wall. And I think that's the critically important thing. So if you're thinking about something in ethics, make sure you have a seat at the ethics committee or, on the consult service or in teaching in the school or some way that you are able to take your newfound learning and apply it. That's where I think it's going to have the greatest impact.
Great.
I can completely mirror this. So I do think for leadership training or the MBA, the advice, for instance, I got is do not do it unless, you know, could have been if you decide to do this early on, because it's a huge time commitment, and if you're not really into see yourself as truly a business, you know, career, then the advice from leadership coaches I had is like, do not do an executive MBA unless it's more like the path that Lorene did, right, where it's really going to either industry or hospital or like, you know, healthcare systems. On the other hand, in terms of research training, as early as possible. So I think if I had the opportunity as a medical student myself, you know, this TL 1 year, that is, you know, a 5th year, I would highly recommend this. Of course, most of you are probably past that, you know, but I think because this will make all the subsequent research better. So waiting how to get formal training in how to do research is not a good idea, as early as possible, because it will make everything you do later better, you know, from a methods perspective. And so I think that should really I think inform your decision also. Don't wait with this. Now with a master in bioethics, that's something I'm probably not really qualified to answer. You know what the right time is. I probably don't have a smart answer for that.
I would echo that in terms of when I did my training. So I knew I wanted to have an academic career, but at the same time, I had just had my only daughter, and I was doing the Alzheimer lecture, which is this like really comprehensive review. You have to give the keynote lecture. So I was getting my MPH, I was doing night classes, I was burning the candle on both ends. There's never a good time in your life, you know. Now I think about it, I go home, I make dinner, I do math homework with my daughter. You know, if you think about it, you really have to do the things that you're passionate about. And if you really want to get the master's, just go ahead and do it, because you make time. At the end of the day, you will always make time for what's important. And like Peter said, the training will amplify your research so much more. And I think you almost need to show that you have gotten additional training to be competitive for grant funding these days. So I highly echo the go ahead, do it. If it's even a consideration in your mind, just make time for it and go ahead.
Thank you all. That's really great advice. Appreciate it.
Great. So with that, I think we'll draw the session to a close. I'd like to thank all three speakers for sharing your experiences, and we've all benefited from that. Thank you very much.